to give his apologies then, don't
Mm.
Councillor Sharp says he's here on Zoom.
Perfect, I'll let him in. Just going live now. Okay, we are live. You ready?
Yep.
Yep. Pop your mic on. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay, we're live? Good. Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Aviation Committee, and it is the 14th of October 2025. My name is Councillor Mark Howard. I will be chairing this meeting. The meeting will be held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent on the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting, it will continue to be available in the public domain. There's no fire drill scheduled this evening, so if the alarm does sound, please leave via the nearest exit. Make your way to the assembly point, which is opposite the barracks. Firstly, it would be useful if all committee members and officers could introduce themselves so the public is aware of who is in this meeting and the role they're undertaking. As I said, my name is Councillor Mark Howard, and we don't have the Vice Chair here today, who is Councillor Knowles, who is unfortunately delayed with a puncture. So over to Councillor Coe.
Councillor Richard Coe, Lead Member of Household and Regulatory Services, Member of the Committee.
Good evening, Councillor Karen Davis.
Hello, I'm Chloe Plummer, Democratic Services Officer. I'll be clerking the meeting.
Good evening, Councillor Julian Sharp, voting member of the panel.
And we also have Chris Joyce present on Zoom too.
Chris Joyce, I am the Assistant Director of Placemaking, Partnerships and Sustainability at the Royal Borough.
Okay, I think that's everyone.
Michael's on.
Oh, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself, Michael, or do you want to wait until you're ready? There you are.
I'll very briefly, yes, Michael Thornton, Heathrow Strategic Planning Group of Local Authorities. I'll tell you more about myself on the item. Thank you.
Right, I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, please state your name, capacity, if appropriate. I will ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I am able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting and have the individual removed. I would like to remind councillors to improve our time effectiveness. As a committee, I would like you to limit the repetition of points or questions that have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions that you would like raised during your request to speak. We will now start with the agenda items. Do we have apologies for absence, Chloe?
So no apologies for absence, Chair, apart from Councillor Neil Knowles, who we've heard is in on the side of the A403. Yeah, the A40.
Any declarations of interest? None mentioned. Minutes, are we able to approve the minutes from last time? I think we need someone to propose who's not me, basically. That's good.
And I'll second that.
That's good, thank you. Matters arising, there was only one matter arising, which was to share details of the KISA and the forums, which I did after the last time, I'm pretty sure, but I've repeated today as well. Anyone who wishes to get in touch with the forums, please use the emails provided. Any problems, get in touch with me and I will emphasise how important it is for RBWM people to attend and get them to let you in. Any other meeting points? Great. Number 5, update on RBWM strategic mission following the council cabinet approvals. Richard, would you like to share what's happened or?
Yes, I can do, although unfortunately I was on holiday, but the draft sort of guideline policy for officers that we discussed in the Aviation Forum went through Cabinet successfully and is now adopted. And so we're now, working on getting it desktop published up to look beautiful, and then a plan for sharing that more widely possibly amongst other councils and members of Parliament affected by the Heathrow situation. And we were told at a meeting this morning that, in fact, the HSPG have shared the document already to a few other councils.
Great, that's good. Thank you. Do we have any questions on that? There's not in the room, so I'm asking sort of Julian or Chris, any questions? Okay, everyone seems to be shaking their heads, although we could.
Maybe muted.
I think Julian was saying no, he was, but we'll ask. You're mute, Julian.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm fine. That's fine.
Okay. Right. I think the big question now is that what do we do with this policy and this mission that we've got now? And I think that's the big question that we need to address over the next coming months, but sharing it widely and possibly moving it up the food chain into Westminster might be a really good idea. And if we can figure out how to do that, be good. Any comments, or shall we move on? Okay. Item 6, an update on Heathrow expansion. We have Michael Thornton from the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group who's going to give us a quick update, as well as Chris Joyce, who is going to give us an update. So I'm not sure which person would like to go first. Don't all rush.
I was going to say, do you want me to just give an update and sort of overview of where I think we are, and then obviously Michael can share where Heathrow Strategic Planning Group is. So obviously government indicated its support for expansion of third runway at Heathrow, invited promoters to come forward with submissions by the end of July. We understand there have been multiple submissions to government. I think there are 3 that are in the public domain, but we understand there are more than that in total that have been submitted to government. We're still awaiting a government response. In our conversations with Heathrow, we understand that they're pushing for and expecting a government response shortly, although shortly can mean pretty much anything in kind of government terms. Heathrow has since restarted its DCO process that it paused as a result of the legal challenge and then the pandemic, and therefore have started the process of engagement with local authorities, the planning inspectorate, and that's at a very early stage. They've shared in the public domain a version of their submission to government, which they are effectively sharing with local authorities and presented at a recent meeting, and in effect they will be proceeding along a programme to progress that development consent order. There is a consultation that's been put out around the revisions to the EIA scoping, which is the environmental impact assessment, and there's been HSPG and local authority, or HSPG have prepared a response for that on behalf of local authorities. And we're also expecting that government will have to go through the process to update the Aviation National Policy Statement. So that's the kind of broad steps of where we are in terms of we will expect a lot more detail as we go through the development consent order process. But at the moment it's fairly limited in terms of the information that's in the public domain, available for residents and councils to understand what the impacts might be.
During the meetings we've had in the last couple of weeks, we've become aware that there's 7 bids to run runway 3, which is what we're talking about, or to build runway 3, should I say. We've got the obvious one, which is Heathrow Airport Limited. We've got a company called Aurora, which is trying to put forward a shortened runway option, and then 5 mystery bids which have not gone public. So anything you want to say about this, Chris?
So at this stage, the only organisations that have engaged with us as a local authority are Heathrow Airport themselves. They are progressing effectively the same scheme that they were progressing through DCO previously, which is kind of 3 equally long runways, the third runway to the northwest, with additional terminal buildings effectively around Terminal 5 and a satellite to the north. So in terms of the other proposals, we know that the Aurora proposals suggest a shorter runway, but as I said, at the moment there's limited detail in terms of the potential benefits and impacts of different versions of the scheme, because we're still at an early stage.
So I'm very conscious of not wanting to steal Michael's thunder, because he's obviously got a lot of information about what's going on. So anything else to add, Chris, before I turn this over to Michael and he can fill in, and then we'll try and fill in any gaps which arise between the two?
No, happy for Michael to give his presentation, and then we can pick up perhaps details and questions.
Great. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Do you want me to say a little bit about who HSPG are first, or should I just go straight into addressing?
Yes, could you just do a brief intro just for the record, because it just helps.
Yeah. Let me just share a slide if I may, because it will save saying some words. Is that working for you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. It's just a very simple slide. Those local councils are the current members of the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group. As you'll see there, some of those are London boroughs within the Greater London area. A lot of them are local authorities outside of London. And indeed, this is one of the key issues about Heathrow, really. It sits on the very edge of lots of administrative boundaries. It's at the very bottom of Hillingdon and feels at the bottom of Hillingdon, as it were. It's on the very edge of London. It's on the very edge of lots of other people's patches, which are but the ends of the runway. So it's a real difficulty with Heathrow is it kind of falls between it falls between the legs of the stool, as it were. So one of the point of Heathrow Strategic Planning Group really is to bring the local authorities together so that they can deal with the cross-boundary issues, the strategic issues, and look at the thing as a whole, because clearly the impact of an airport is much bigger than the boundary of the airport. It's miles of airspace going up to sort of 4,000 feet, extending over a period of 5-10 miles in all directions. So much bigger area. So that's the purpose. The group is it's a group of the willing. So for instance, you'll notice that Hillingdon's name is not there. They are not a financially contributing member of the group. There are other authorities such as Bucks, who of course reorganised in the last few years to become Buckinghamshire. There are other authorities that we're working very closely with, including Hillingdon, I have to say, increasingly, but they are not currently financial members, contributors to the strategic planning group. So I think our membership will grow again as it to a size that it had previously when we were dealing with the first DCO. So it's a group of the willing, it's a political mix, it's a geographical mix, it's a functional mix of councils, quite different organisations, and indeed that's all changing, as we all know too. So the group provides an important place to come together to look at the things strategically, to share knowledge, understanding. So I think really have somebody hold the ring and talk and provide some consistency while local authorities are going through a period of uncertainty at the moment as well. That's becoming an important factor. So we're there. There's a small secretariat group of part-time independent consultants like myself that provide a sort of convene the meetings and provide some technical support. But that's HSPG. Heathrow's name is on there because they do contribute a little bit to our costs at the moment, because they see the value of having a conduit to talk to all the local authorities at once. And when we dealt with the previous DCO back in 2018-19, the planning inspectorate saw HSPG as the main conduit for talking to local authorities, as did Heathrow, and we had quite a big administrative function to facilitate all that. We're now talking about how things will be organised for a new DCO, whoever the promoter may be. It may be Heathrow, it may be selected to be another. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think our role will be slightly different, probably less administrative in organisation and a bit more about providing a place for the local authorities to talk together without Heathrow in the room, so that we can develop our joint understandings and find joint positions where we have them. Certainly a lot of joint questions, common concerns about things like noise standards, air quality standards, means of providing effective control over growth and so forth. So lots of things that we'll have in common, but fundamentally it has to be said, we don't have a position on the third runway as a group, and amongst that membership you see on the screen there, you'll find local authorities are very much in support of expansion, and others who are very much against, and others that sit kind of on the fence much more, and understand that this is going to be a government decision and they want to get the best for their people out of it. So that's fundamentally who we are, and where we stand. I think probably just I'll say, before going on to the proposals that have come forward, we've in fact today, with the endorsement of the leaders meeting, the executive partnership group of leaders of all those authorities, have agreed an outcomes statement, or an outcomes framework we call it, which essentially sets out what we want to achieve out of any growth or expansion at Heathrow going forward. And as you can see on the screen, this addresses things like place making, the infrastructure requirements, issues around net zero, well-being, particularly concerned about health and noise and air quality, use of airspace, and also, of course, the economic and social dimensions. So, this is one of the key things for local authorities with dealing with Heathrow and airports, is that it touches so many of the different duties and responsibilities that a local authority has. Whether it's economic, whether it's health and well-being, whether it's strategic planning, it's really cuts right across local authority business. There's a need for the local authorities and Heathrow to collaborate around a lot of those areas to each achieve what we want to achieve. So it's really important that we're able to work together. Big issue for local authorities. A lot of it is very technical and difficult and outside of the rest of your day job. So I think that some of the, that's one of the benefits of working as a group. We can develop that understanding and learning and commission some expertise where we did. So that document setting out what we're trying to achieve, Council, and you've got the details of accessing that document and can share that, and it's on our website as well. But fundamentally, that sets out a whole lot of whole set of demands on some 20 odd pages, I think. There's a huge alignment of interest, I think, with that and some of the points that are set out in your vision document that's appended to the papers here. There's a lot of commonality in approach, in that we work with all interests, all communities, in order to achieve the common objectives that we have. And there's real concerns around engagement, as well as the process of engagement between communities and the airport, as well as the outcomes that we're trying to achieve in terms of noise limits and spatial sustainable planning and so forth.
Michael, can I ask a sort of a directing question? It came out of the meeting that I attended with HSPG this morning. We're obviously looking at effectively two packages of expansion, which Heathrow are looking at. There's the H8, the
Yes.
development plan, which covers various terminal changes and upgrades and all sorts of things, as well as the, shall we say, the runway 3 package, which is a different game completely to the H8. How do you feel about those two packages at the moment? The H8, I was a little surprised about how little concern Heathrow seemed to have about delivering the subjects in our 5 blocks that on your presentation there. They seemed to think it was more of a basically an airport upgrade without any questions more than anything else. Yet it was going to increase the capacity of the airport by about 10%.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for raising that. I think it's really important to turn over that H8. So this is the submission. H8 is a period of time and a financial settlement that's agreed between government or the CAA and the airport, and it essentially sets the landing charges that will be applied to the operators in the airport. It raises a sum of money, and it approves an investment plan for where that money should be spent. Some of that is things that we've very much welcome, like improving, decarbonising the airport, moving the terminals from, say, gas heating to, greener, more sustainable methods. But it also includes a major investment in terminals and other infrastructure within the airport that would add 10 million passengers, up to 10 million passengers a year. That as a sum, that's enough passengers to trigger the need for a DCO in itself. If you were building a new building to accommodate 10 million passengers, it would need a planning consent, and indeed it would need a development consent order. It's a huge amount of growth. They're expecting to achieve that growth without adding any more flights. So their expectation is that there'll be bigger planes and planes that are fuller to achieve that extra 10 million passengers. Those extra 10 million passengers have obviously got to the airport. So it involves a big increase in travel demand and all the other types of activity that go with travellers to the airport. Plus, it's something like a 20% increase in cargo. Sorry, Chris.
We've got a couple of questions. Sorry, yeah. We've got Chris and Richard who want to ask questions.
So, I'd just say finally on H8, it involves changes to terminals and so forth that would be consistent with further expansion. With a development consent order and a 3rd runway. So it's a sort of a first step towards. It's something that it need not necessarily follow that there is a development consent and a 3rd runway. Sorry, Chris.
Okay, Chris first then.
Sorry, I was just going to add to Michael's point. This development is effectively within their permitted development and is effectively covered by the permissions that they got for the effectively off the back of the Terminal 5 inquiry. So whilst it's substantial growth from today, it's still within the limits and the planning conditions of the Terminal 5 inquiry. So as long as the airport stays within those limits, it effectively doesn't need further planning permission to expand within that remit. So that's why probably the conversation is less around some of these topics as they would be with expansion, because effectively it's a negotiation around the planning process. But I think it's really important in our engagement with Heathrow, and we do this with other authorities and HSPG, is how we continue to push even business as usual operations to deliver the improvements in these spaces and recognising the need for them to do that.
Yeah, and in the ads of conduct, earlier to the environmental
Michael, we can't hear you. When you move away from the microphone, we can't hear
Apologies.
you. But can I just bring in Richard now? He's also got a sort of on that subject.
So yeah, what was concerning at the HSPG meeting this morning, I think, was the sort of view from Heathrow that they could go for these extra passengers without providing the extra transport infrastructure.
Yeah.
And you already see the traffic around Heathrow. We actually need the extra rail links to handle the amount of traffic we already have before they expand. But they were clearly very much focused on their own profit margin rather than the community around them. This was my feeling. It was that they didn't see the need for Southern Rail or Western Rail access on Great Western until they went for third runway, whereas we're already seeing a need for that, and so it was a gap between us and them, I would say.
Yeah, Michael.
Yes. Yeah, it's a little bit of a having your cake and eat it situation. I think sometimes it sort of suits them to play down the significance of this growth, and we could do this within existing consents, and it's no big deal. It's all on the existing airfield. And other times they sort of speak it up as being a very major thing and significant investment opportunity for their new investors and how important this is. So yes, it is literally a bit of a having your cake and eat it position. It's very difficult to find those triggers or those levers to really forcefully intervene and get them to step up their game in terms of things like surface access improvements for this level of work that's involved in the H8 plan. When the settlement, when it's something that we will continue to push and negotiate on. This is all yet to be confirmed as being approved and so forth. So it's not in place as such yet, but it's a real concern.
Michael, I've just been asked, could you stop sharing your screen so that Chloe can take back control of it now, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I had.
That's okay. No, I think I think I was a little surprised, and it's probably something that Chris might want to join in on, about just while they were still talking about an investment plan which had to be approved by government or central government, yet they were still talking about large amounts of investment in various pieces of infrastructure, but nothing to deal with how people got to and from the airport. It just seemed to be a glaring omission in the H8 sort of package that they were talking about. Chris, over to you. You've got a golden hand up.
I was just going to say, because obviously this is part of the regulated process, regulatory process. So because Heathrow is a regulated airport, it has to go through the process of agreeing what money it spends, both in terms of revenue and capital, and therefore what profit it effectively can make, and therefore there's a whole process for calculating then what the charges are, and that process is effectively a long negotiation between the airport and the airline community, which then the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, as the regulator, finally makes a decision on. And there's various steps they have to go through that process. And in my experience, the airlines argue very strongly against investment in improvements to transport. It's usually because they're international bodies. They work across many different countries, and their argument is that governments pay for transport improvements to airports in other locations, and therefore, because effectively any investment would then come through in their charge, the airlines would be paying for it rather than Heathrow. So this is where the kind of difficulty comes through, is effectively the regulatory process, and because that charge, any investment will be passed on through the charge to the airline operators, they they would always argue against the idea of that being included within the regulated asset base for the airport. So this is always a challenge every regulatory period.
Julian, you want to?
Sorry. Can I just say, I thought I'd stopped. I don't drive Zoom very often. I normally use Teams. I'm not familiar. I don't seem to be able to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
It's suggesting that I've stopped at my end, but obviously you can all still see it.
No, you're fine. You stopped sharing your screen now, Michael.
I have done.
Yeah.
Oh, fine. Okay.
Yeah, thank
fine.
you.
Over to Julian. You've been very patient, Julian.
Julian, you're on mute. Can you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm the same. I don't use Zoom very much. It seems to me that with all of this,
Sorry, you're on mute again.
with the current permission for the terminals and changes there, it depends what the existing planning permission actually says about provision of infrastructure. And if the provision of infrastructure there is not included in the planning permission at all, then there is no obligation on Heathrow to provide it, and any discussion about it is just hot air, basically. And I think that leads on to exactly what you were saying, Chris, that unless there is an obligation on Heathrow to provide any of the transport facilities that we have been talking about in our strategic document, unless there is an obligation on Heathrow to provide those, they won't, and they will push back very strongly against that. So they will say if it's a railway improvement or whatever, they will say, well, that's for the government and or anyone else but us to provide that. So if we've got that in our objectives with them, we need to understand very clearly that Heathrow's key objective is not to provide those facilities. And so unless we have a way of enforcing that on them, which I don't believe that at our level we do, so the only way of ensuring that comes through as part of the obligation on Heathrow is to elevate it to government level.
Completely agree with you. I think is that
so we may as well stop talking about anything about the existing planning permission unless provision of transport infrastructure is included in that. And maybe Michael, you can tell us exactly what is in the current planning permission and whether provision of any transport infrastructure is included in that.
Just taking you back a little bit on that, Julian, I think is that we find when we've been talking with Heathrow and Aurora in various presentations which have been made, it seems like the decision on who will get runway 3 package is, or at least pretty good indications about it, will happen in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So I think is that at that time we will know exactly what and how the two can be united or not united. Obviously, what Julian said would be completely true if they were done by 2 separate companies, but if they were the same company, there might be an opportunity to roll the 2 things together and have them looked at as a united front. Do you think that's possible, Chris or Michael? Either of you?
I think it's, if you look across, I suppose, all of the local authorities, that delivery of that public transport infrastructure is absolutely critical. It's not just about issues around kind of sustainability and taking traffic off the road. It's also kind of fundamental to the economic arguments, in my view, because effectively the distribution of the economic benefits will be linked to the transport connectivity, particularly if you have limits on environmental impact or public transport mode shares. If we don't have public transport connections to the west and into our borough, the likelihood is both jobs and businesses will relocate to other parts that do have good public transport accessibility, or you'll limit the amount. I think Michael will say add some more.
What would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd add to that, I think, is that Heathrow needs the transport system to work too. The attractiveness and the success of the airport depends on it having a good reputation for being accessible, for reliable travel times to and from the airport by passengers and air crew and others. They need it to function too. So there is a joint interest in it being successful. They're not here to exploit. They're not here in a thoughtless way. They're just looking to minimise the cost to them and to share the cost with government. It's exactly the same issue if we're looking at the energy infrastructure going forward. There's going to be a need for an awful lot more electrical supply to the airport. They understand that there isn't much more electrical supply available in the region. We need more electrical supply for other development in the region. We have to work together and find ways of collaborating on some of these things to ensure that there's a growth in supply of electrical power, just as we need to ensure that the transport system works properly. So, it is in Heathrow's interest to invest in and support local surface access improvements, and they do that. But it comes down to a negotiation about the extent of that cost and how things are prioritised.
Julian, you wanted to chirp in?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious with the move to more sustainable travel, and obviously that's what the direction of travel. I wondered what Heathrow's view was in terms of how they were going to handle passengers, because obviously if you're looking at active travel, people would be cycling to the airport and that sort of thing, and I wondered how what that would look like in terms of cycling to the airport and how they would handle that. So they had bicycle racks and things like that, obviously, or perhaps you'd have a myriad more buses going into the airport that would perhaps transport people into the area, so you didn't have any more car parking than you have at the moment.
I think you're right there. The presentations I've seen have had a worrying number of car parks being involved, especially the Aurora presentation. It seemed to only have car parks as being the mode of transport there. When we're talking about other forms, I think is that every time we've raised this, the statement that's come back from Heathrow Airport Limited has been, I think it's 55% has got to be from green transport sources or sustainable sources, such as rail or underground and things like that, rather than car. Yet, when we've sort of said, well, does that mean South Rail, West Rail, any other rail? They've been very reluctant to attach themselves to one, the other, or any really, but have basically said that the number can't be achieved without doing something like that. Chris, over to you.
So those numbers that they're quoting are effectively the airport's national policy statement sets out those outcomes that the airport needs to achieve. So it's a mode share target rather than necessarily specifically by mode. And there's a target for passengers, but there's also a target for people who work at the airport. One thing I would say with car parking, sometimes the number of spaces doesn't necessarily reflect the number of car journeys. So I'll give a really kind of simple example, is if you have a car parking space for a family of 4 who drive to the airport and leave their car there for a week, you need effectively 7 days worth of single space taken for a whole day. that requires lots of car parking, but it only generates one trip to the airport and one trip back in 7 days. So that's actually a limited amount of traffic, but takes quite a lot of parking demand. A space for, you know, people working at the airport on 3 shifts might generate, or 2 shifts might generate 2 trips a day in each direction, and that will happen kind of every day. So that's then quite a lot of trips, and the space is taken all day, every day. But then if you have a family coming in a taxi, the taxi comes to the airport, drops them off, then drives away. It's twice the number of trips because they're only there for a short period of time. They don't need very much car parking capacity because it's, you know, 5 minutes. You can have that, you know, hundreds of those trips a day for a small number of parking spaces. So it's not necessarily the case that more parking means lots more traffic, and not every kind of trip and not every mode is equal in terms of its traffic impacts. So I think we need to be a bit careful of just equating car parking spaces bad. You know, no car parking space is good, because that might actually drive behaviour of lots of drop-off journeys, which means double the number of trips and a greater intensity of traffic. So it isn't quite as straightforward, but I agree that we need to be pushing them towards more sustainable modes of travel, fewer car trips, less impacts on road congestion and all of those things. So it's those outcomes that are really important from our perspective.
Okay. So Julian, last word.
Yes, thanks. You know, it seems to me that really not enough planning has been done on transport and how the transport infrastructure is going to work with the airport overall, whether it's going to be transport from the east or from the west or the north or the south. We don't seem to have got a very clear idea of how the extra runway with the extra terminal capacity that's going to need is actually going to work in terms of how the airport's going to get them there and people there and out again, without needing a multitude of car parks around the place, which obviously they're not going to be permitted to have. So that implies then that people won't be doing that and will be doing cycling or a train or taxi or whatever, but essentially public transport and easy use transport. But that infrastructure isn't there yet at the moment, I don't think.
Michael?
This brings us to why it's so important to think about the H8 growth at the airport and then future expansion with associated with a third runway. Why it's so important to look at these two things as two separate steps. And in truth, we probably have a lot more ability to control, influence, and get transparent the discussion and the planning of the parking and the public transport strategies and so on with expansion and the third runway than we do with this first stage, the 8H growth. You know, that's because there essentially will have to be transport strategies and plans agreed to go with the eventual proposal, whichever one it is. And the solutions that might suit the Aurora scheme, with its emphasis on new terminal expansion over to the western side of the airport, you know, might look quite different to the transport solutions that go with the Heathrow promoted scheme. You know, and we clearly we don't know which one of those schemes is going to be selected yet, and necessarily what the right solutions are. But certainly we would expect the national policy statement, when it's revised, we would expect it to set new expectations of modal split and other targets and levers and measures for ensuring that the transport system works sustainably, just as we would expect it to specify the runway length. And that, you know, that is another big issue that perhaps we'll come on to in a minute when we finish the question of surface access, Councillor.
Just before Chris comes in on the last word, does anyone actually have the exact figures, as opposed to my rough figures, about what number of passengers we're looking at basically today, after H8, and then after runway 3, just to give an idea of the scale for everybody, because I think it sometimes gets lost. I've heard 84 million today, 10%, 10% extra from H8, which would take us up to, I don't know, say 92, 93 million. But then I've been hearing upwards of another 40 million passenger journeys with runway 3. Is that overstating it all?
I think it's those sorts of ballpark, and we don't know, this very extended phasing for this, full occupation of that capacity and runway space is expected to take until 2045, 2050. It's 25 years away, possibly.
Yeah, but we do have to make sure.
So we've got to think about it over time as well as the end state numbers.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And some of the growth pains might be worse than the final state.
Okay.
If things are allowed to get out of sync. So this is why the sort of environmentally managed growth that we talk about is so important. Some sort of managed staircasing of growth along with necessary infrastructure like surface transport capacity is so important, so that this long growth, big growth, can be managed in a sensible sort of escalation.
Chris, over to you.
I'll just answer your question. The Heathrow expansion proposal document, the summary document, talks about serving up to 150 million passengers. So we're talking substantial growth. I think last time they were talking about more like 130, 140 million passengers with the kind of end states that they're talking about. This time the submission talks about 150. So, that obviously takes into account latest projections on aircraft sizes, load factors, and all those sorts of things. But just on the surface transport point, I would agree with Michael that the planning, the DCO, is the best opportunity to secure those conditions on development, those requirements. I think there is also a really important point here that we risk that Heathrow will say government needs to fund the rail schemes. Government will say Heathrow needs to fund the rail schemes, and we get stuck in the middle with neither of them coming forward with that, and therefore the scheme's not coming forward, or coming forward way too late, or just. So I think it's important for us as Windsor Maidenhead, but us collectively as local authorities, to almost say to both government and Heathrow, this needs to be delivered as part of expansion. Who funds it and exactly what proportions is up to you two, but you need to go and work it out. And so I suppose every message that we're delivering to Heathrow is that this needs to happen, whoever's funding it, and every message to government needs to be, this needs to happen. We don't care who funds it, as long as someone funds this and brings forward the appropriate infrastructure to support the scheme.
Okay, so I think taking that point, we've covered surface access. Anything else anyone wants to cover on this about the runway? Because I think one of the big discussions is about the length of the runway and whether or not it should be a short one or a long one. I've heard two totally different opinions saying that both are the best idea and the other one is a bad idea. So any opinions there, Michael, Chris?
Yeah, so at the moment, the runways are, I think, about 3,900 metres, and the other one's about 3,600 metres. The current national policy statement requires, and Heathrow's proposal is for a third runway of 3,500 metres, so a little bit shorter than the existing runways. But that sort of length would accommodate, as far as we know, anything that does fly or is envisaged to fly to operate from Heathrow, that might want to operate from Heathrow. So that includes both the largest jets like the A380s, fully loaded for very long haul flights, as well as some of the newer generation of narrow body long range aircraft like the Airbus 321 XLR, which is supposed to be revolutionising the way long haul air travel happens, where we don't need to rely on we can go to more places with fewer far away, rather than have to rely on jumbo jets flying on thick routes between major hubs. It becomes possible to fly more direct with the smaller aircraft. So that's very garbled. What I'm saying is those type of aircraft need a lot of runway too. A lot of the aircraft that are used within Europe can use a much shorter runway. So the sort of figures that have been talked about at the moment is Heathrow are talking, and the government talk about runway of 3,500 metres. Heathrow are also exploring the option for a shorter runway of, I believe, 3,200 metres. That reduces some of the impact on the ground and potentially the motorway and costs and so on, but it does limit what aircraft can use that runway. Aurora are proposing a runway of 2,800 metres, so significantly shorter again. And it's very much depends who you ask about this. I've been gathering information on this from a variety of sources. Aurora claim that 97% of the aircraft used in Heathrow could fit on a 2,800 metre runway. A lot of the airlines and other sources are saying, well, actually, no, in real world conditions and allowing for adequate safety margins and full loadings and so on, that's not possible. But we might be able to use a 3,200 runway, or ideally we need a 3,500 metre runway. It's a really important question. It's certainly the full 3,500 metre runway is vital for the big jumbo jets, the biggest jets. For those new generation narrow body long haul aircraft, there could be a significant difference between 3,200 and 2,800 metre runways. And those sorts of issues have got to be bottomed out, and government ultimately give clear guidance about it. Why is it important? It's important because one of the underlying principles of expansion is that all three runways could be used in alternation with each other. So it is possible to literally switch off one runway to give rest and respite to the communities under that runway and rely on the other two. And you have a pattern of switching three runways in either direction to achieve that. So it maximizes predictable respite and rest for communities. If one of the runways isn't quite capable of providing that equal opportunity, then that pattern of respite just cannot be delivered in the same way. And it was that offer of respite and the ability that also provided to reduce night flying, because you had greater capacity in the daytime, that was one of the fundamental sort of reasons for the original commission in recommending the choice of Heathrow for expansion. And it's one of the underlying principles of the national policy statement as it stands. So it's really important that we really get to the bottom of what length of runway is required, what is Heathrow for, what type of services and flights are we trying to cater for, what sort of operational pattern is possible with the runways that are actually called for. Because there's a major difference potentially there, and we don't know all the answers, but certainly as a group, HSBG are putting in questions around this in sort of early engagement in the rewriting of the national policy statement. And in fact, DfT have asked us to comment on this, so we're in the process of doing that now. We're expecting to see a new national policy statement sometime probably in the spring next year, and that will really signal, the march forward. with all of this. So key decisions will be about the government being clear about how many horses they're backing between sort of now and next spring, whether they want to progress two schemes in parallel or see two schemes progressed in parallel and make a final decision next year, or whether they push one out the way now as the preferred, pick a preferred sort of scheme and specification now.
I think that was what we were hearing from Heathrow and Aurora at the meeting, that they felt that whatever comes out of government in the next 2-3 weeks before the end of the month, it will define what runway, what sort of package is going to be there. And after that, it all starts to become a lot more solid. But I'm going to sort of like pull us up there. I think is that at this moment is that the main big thing that I think is that we've got to say is that really at this moment, we don't know. None of the operators know what's happening. And really, we're all sort of waiting for 2 or 3 weeks down the line when the first big jump is coming, and we find out which of the bid operators are going to be moving forward, even if it's only a little bit.
You know, our efforts at the moment are getting ourselves match fit, really, in terms of, you know, schemes of delegation, encouraging people to sort out their schemes of delegation, get ready for this, get our own resourcing ready, get influence where we can, and just get ready for when we have a bit more clarity and know what we're dealing with.
Great. Well, thank you very much both to Chris and to Michael for filling us in on that. It's very helpful. And I think just as almost leaping a little ahead to item 7 is that the report from this afternoon's HSPG meeting was that from the document that was put forward, we were in pretty much agreement with. But the big thing is how do we engage that and move that forward into central government, and getting some sort of engagement plan with decision makers, or at least influencers closer to the decision makers than we are. So we'll have a think about that here as well. Okay, so thank you, Michael, very helpful. Any questions before we wave them goodbye, or are we all done? You're released back into the community, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Okay, with that done, item 7, partnership bodies. Anyone got anything to report? I mean, everything that I've seen has just been covered by Michael and Chris, and in the last discussion, because Heathrow expansion is just about everything that there is to talk about. So anything else anyone wants to bring forward? No? No. Right, so that's item 7. Item 8, I've been talking with Becky Coughlin, who's the Director of Communications and Communities at Heathrow Airport Limited, and invited them to do a presentation to us. And they've suggested that they attend the 13th of January meeting 2026, which is our next date. And by that time, they should have something a little bit more firm to tell us, because they will, in theory, have been a month or so after the government has given them a major steer one way or another about what's happening in the future. So if everyone's agreeing with that, I'll offer the invitation. Okay. Great. Apart from that, anything else, or shall we wrap it up? That's it. We'll wrap it up. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming. See you, Julian. Bye-bye, Chris.
Thanks,